and welcome to Telewizja, Republika. As our viewers know very well, last week the geopolitical aspect of the Russian aggression against Ukraine became the top talking point for politicians on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. In a way, it was Donald Trump, presidential candidate of Republicans, who triggered this geopolitical transatlantic debate. He did that saying the following words.
NATO was busted until I came along. I said, everybody's going to pay. They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer.
And to be honest, we know that this is not the first time he said this kind of thing. Back then, while Trump was still US president, he challenged NATO officials, saying the same, actually, about the way that Germany treats American security guarantees.
Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened.
And those questions, to be honest, are not the only questions that are raised or were raised by Donald Trump while he was president of the United States. This is a serious issue, and the fact that Germany sent over 100 billion euros to Putin's coffer until the mysterious explosions ended Nord Stream's energy political operations is one of the key factors that made the Russian aggression against Ukraine even possible. Trump was right asking those questions in Brussels ahead of the full-scale invasion that began last year. Trump bashed EU allies of the United States on this side of the ocean, and the political hell broke loose. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk lectured Republican lawmakers, tweeting the following, or saying that President Reagan must be turning in his grave and that Republicans should be ashamed. He tweeted that until actually the senators made the decision about the support of Ukraine. But before that happened, Senator Lindsey Graham answered like this.
Republican senators of America, Ronald Reagan, who helped millions of us to win back our freedom and independence, must be turning in his grave today. Shame on you. To the Prime Minister of Poland, I could care less what you think.
But what actually happened? Here's a brief look at the timeline of last week in Washington. Former President Trump celebrated the failure of the bipartisan border bill, crediting himself for its demise. He had previously urged Republicans to oppose the bill, claiming it would benefit President Biden politically. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Trump expressed satisfaction over the bill's failure, emphasizing his role in its defeat. That's a quote. You give illegals taxpayer-funded lawyers, so they have millions of dollars in this agreement, in this deal, which we, by the way, killed, end quote. That's Donald Trump. Sunday 11th, a stalemate on immigration and foreign aid. The bipartisan border security bill was met with resistance and ultimately failed. Key issues included funding for Ukraine and Israel and proposed immigration provisions, allowing thousands of migrants to cross daily. House Speaker Mike Johnson declared it dead on arrival, and Senate Majority Leader Schumer faced defeat in a procedural vote. On the same day, Democrats propose a response to border deal collapse. Following the collapse of the border deal, Democrats saw an opportunity to address immigration issues and criticize Republicans for opposing a solution. They plan to highlight this in TV ads and through local news, accusing Republicans of prioritizing chaos over national security. On Monday, 12 February, Republicans reject what was called by the media a border security compromise. Republicans influenced by Trump rejected a compromise on border security, leaving the government searching for ways to manage the border more effectively. The White House evaluates its options while lawmakers focus on a standalone foreign aid bill. No executive action could actually have done what this bipartisan agreement could have done, said White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Tuesday, 13th of February. Speaker Mike Johnson opposed the Senate proposal for foreign aid without tougher border security measures, questioning future congressional support for Ukraine. The Senate passed a $95 billion defense spending bill for Ukraine, despite objections showcasing bipartisan support for the aid. As Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said, and that's a quote, "Today, we make Vladimir Putin regret the day he questioned America's resolve," end quote. There is a famous saying about Americans being interested in foreign policies only under one condition. We're gonna go deeper into that in a couple of seconds. Before we do so, you can join us on rachoń.com. That's our Substack. You can leave us your email here and subscribe to our daily reports on the issues that are going on the front lines of the global war against the West that we report daily on this program. My name is Michał Rachoń. This is Rachoń. And we are rolling. And our guest tonight is Adjunct Professor of Legislative Affairs at the George Washington University, Mr. Mark Strand. Mr. Strand is a former president of the Congressional Institute and 2017 fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, and he is also an author of a great blog on Substack, which is titled Politics and Sausage Making. Great to have you on our program, Mr. Strand, Professor Strand. Great to have you on Telewizja Republika.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. I should say I very much enjoy your Substack column too. It's one of the most informative you can get here in the United States on what's going on in Ukraine.
Great to hear those words, and this is probably the good moment for our viewers to subscribe to Professor Strand's Substack. And I'm going to start with the question regarding the thing that you wrote on 9th of February. You actually argue that we are having a very strange time, as far as I understand it, in U.S. politics because of a kind of isolationism that is visible. And this isolationism, which is a common feature of U.S. Politics, but not always in the times when the U.S. is not involved directly in a war. So my question is that really the case? Or is U.S. actually right now in the middle of war, the war that was not declared by the collective opponents or enemies, should I say?
Well, it's a great question because I'm not sure America itself understands where it's at right now. As you say, it's common for Americans to go into a period of isolationism in between wars. Before World War I, they didn't want to get involved in Europe. Before World War II, in August, before we were attacked in December by Japan, we nearly abolished our military draft, and it survived by one vote in the Congress. So you can imagine what would have happened if we disbanded our army, 4 months before Pearl Harbor. The Republicans changed a lot with Ronald Reagan, who had a vision for a world that was free of communism and the idea of peace through strength. But the Republican Party is started forgetting a little bit of Ronald Reagan these days, and it's starting to turn a little bit more isolationist. However, they snap out of that fairly quickly when the times require it. There's a famous maxim about American policies is that Americans don't care about foreign policy unless you make them. And if you force them to care about it, then they get very involved.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan is an author of a great strategy, great simple strategy that we remember in this part of the world very well. It's simple. We win, they lose. They,
Exactly.
I mean, Russians, the state and the evil empire, which was imprisoning people like myself and my countrymen. So what is the reason and what do you make of the whole debate around border policies on one hand and the financing of the military effort of America's allies in Central Europe, in Middle East, and close to the Chinese borders?
It's concerning because there really isn't a link. They're two separate issues. The border, it's convenient to make the border sound like it's a foreign policy issue. You protect our border before you protect everyone else's border. It's a good political slogan, but it's kind of not really as relevant. The problem is, of course, is that Donald Trump has gotten involved in the issue and has made a lot of, and he sort of encouraged rural Republicans to oppose a bill, anything in the border that had to do with the border because it's not perfect, in his words, and he's waiting for him to get elected president to do that. Well, the Senate went ahead and this morning, just a couple hours ago, voted 70-29 to approve military aid, including $60 billion for Ukraine. But now the Speaker of the House is saying, well, you didn't include anything on the border. But that's exactly what he told them not to include last week. So I think the politics is very muddled. But you have to understand it from this perspective that Mike Johnson, who's a very good man, is politically very weak. The same people who threw out Kevin McCarthy are waiting for him to make one misstep and to do the same thing to him. And the Republicans kind of put themselves in this difficult position of making their speaker very prone by just a few people to knock them out of office. So he's treading very carefully. In the past, he's been pro aid to Ukraine. So there is some hope that he will get around to figuring out a way to do it. But there are other ways to get it done in the House, which we can talk about some more. So I have some hope, but it's not going to happen quickly.
Okay, so because you mentioned something that is pretty clear and pretty visible from this side of Atlantic Ocean, that it's not that you have a choice, or either you are protecting your border or you are supporting states that are your allies, especially if you take into account that this is actually a part of the long-term U.S. strategy to have their or yours troops located and dislocated in the hot spots of the global geopolitical map, not to have to fight wars on your beaches of your great country, but somehow it looks like those two issues are treated as one issue by the politicians right now. Why?
Well, there was a thought that with Republicans becoming a bit more isolationist, that some of the Republicans who supported aid to Ukraine and Israel and to Taiwan needed the cover of a vote on the border. So they could say that, well, look what I did. I voted for this strong protection for the border. At the same time, I voted for aid to our allies. And so the original idea that started back, we'd start talking about this back in August, was that you would have to match them up. And the Senate went and did that very slowly, unfortunately. Had we done this, I think, in November or December, it would have passed fairly easily. But we're into a period of presidential politics. We have very long elections in this country, unfortunately. And so it changed once it got to January. I think the link, we have an expression in America that you can walk and chew gum at the same time. That you can do more than one thing. We can protect our border. It's not hard to do. Every country has to have a border that is respected, or they're not a sovereign country. At the same time, we need to help our allies. You made a great point about Americans putting troops in dangerous places, because we've had this long belief that if you can manage global crisis when they're smaller, it prevents them becoming bigger. And that's right now in Ukraine. If we help Ukraine with their situation, Not only does it hold the Russians back, it prevents Russia from attacking other countries. It also makes China think twice about attacking Taiwan. And
Well,
so
it even looks like kind of a probe if we take into account the silent discussions and visits in Beijing of high Russian representatives ahead of the attack of Russia against on the territory of Ukraine. But you also mentioned in your latest text on your Substack the thing which is very often forgotten in a way, which is those things that happened in Afghanistan couple of months before the Russian invasion on Ukraine. What is the relation between two events in different parts of the world? And actually, Americans are not in Ukraine, so what is the relation? Is there a relation between what happened in Afghanistan and what happened in Ukraine?
yeah, I think there really is. And it goes back to Reagan's view that American weakness is provocative, that it invites aggression from our enemies. Russia always had to calculate what would be the American response if they invaded Ukraine again. And so I think Putin estimated that Joe Biden would not respond strongly, and that encouraged him to make the invasion in the first place. And that's the whole thing. China is now watching to see, are we going to stand by our allies in Europe? Are we going to stand by our allies in the Middle East? Because if we're not, that makes taking Taiwan fairly easy for them. I mean, they can just overwhelm them with sheer military force. But if they believe the United States will respond militarily to an attack on Taiwan, they'd have to hesitate. So they watch our presidents very closely to see whether or not they have the strength to come back against them if they try to take some sort of aggressive action, and see whether or not they are going to meet some resistance. And right now, I think the calculation was that Putin thought that we would not resist very strongly.
Yeah, and that's my question. What is the takeaway of the way that the U.S. responded to Ukrainian attack? On one hand, U.S. and other Western NATO states basically are in a way guarantors of several agreements regarding Ukraine borders, not only those from 1990s, but also those from the previous phases of the war that Ukraine is waging on its territory. And there is no doubt that without American help, without help of NATO states like Great Britain, my home country, Poland, to some extent also Germany, Ukraine couldn't sustain the Russian aggression. But on the other hand, we got lots of questions regarding the will, the U.S. administration will to provide weapons that can be decisive in kicking out Russia out of the territory of Ukraine. So what is the geopolitical answer to the question that you just mentioned, answering the previous question?
You know, the bottom line is that it is in the interest of the United States and Europe to defeat Russia in Ukraine. And some of the things that trouble us, while we're glad that President Biden responded and has given military aid, you make the point that he did not give them the decisive weapons. It's great to train people in combined arms tactics with tanks and everything else, but if there's no air support, it wouldn't work. We would never send our own troops into a combined arms battle without air support. So we know that's needed. And the missiles that can make Crimea a much more dangerous place for Russians need to be done too. So you almost get the sense that the Pentagon was thinking we will do just enough to weaken the Russian army at the expense of Ukrainian troops, but not enough to defeat the Russians. And this is a big mistake because Putin is already saying very clearly he's at war with the West. And so we might as well acknowledge that we're at war with Putin because that's what he has announced himself. So it's almost naive to not fight back with everything you have. And history shows the Russians respect strength and they have contempt for weakness. And if you show weakness, they're going to push all the harder.
Yeah, but the question is,
that's what I think the Biden administration is mistaken.
Yeah, the question is that a kind of weakness in a way? Because on the other hand, this support made the great, impressive Ukrainian counteroffensive in the first year of war even possible. It wouldn't be possible without this support. But still, Russia holds about 1/4 of the territory of Ukraine. So for me, the answer to this question is not clear. The view is blurred in a way here. Isn't it the case of unwillingness to change the world equilibrium? Because defeating Russia would diminish the Russian global position in a way. I wouldn't be worried as a Polish citizen. Poland is on the Russian wish list. Countries in Central Europe are on Russian wish list. But is that the calculation that was made in White House or Pentagon, not to humiliate, not to defeat Russia to the extent that it would collapse as a political power, and this could be caused by defeat in Ukraine?
You know, that's an excellent analysis of what's going on, because the reality is that it does seem that was exactly the Biden administration's calculation. And it's troubling when you see that's kind of their calculation with Iran, too, is that they don't want to do anything to go too far with Iran, but they're willing to bloody their nose a little bit by attacking some of their troops after we announced a week before where our targets are, which made a very ineffective attack. You know, and the same message we're kind of sending to China at the same time is that we really don't want you to attack Taiwan. And we're not going to attack you over it, but just please don't do it. You know, deterrence is based on the belief that if you do something to us, we are going to do something to you. And so what is wrong with defeating Putin in Russia? And I think this is a mistake of the calculation of the Biden administration. It's kind of interesting that there are not many wars in the United States that the Democrats have supported. They didn't support Bush in the Middle East. They didn't support, they barely supported Clinton in the former Yugoslavia, in those areas too. So they've been supporting this one, mostly because it's, you know, they think they're being anti-Trump to a large degree. It worries me that their commitment to the issue could fade too if we go too long without Ukraine showing progress. The problem is, to show progress, they need the right weapons to do it.
Yeah.
If we give the right weapons, I think Ukraine will demonstrate that they're capable of pushing the Russians back. But again, the longer we wait, the more they dig in.
The longer we wait, the more people die, and that's also probably the fundamental issue, at least from the perspective of the brave people of Ukraine who are fighting this war. But that brings me, and you actually mentioned it in a way, to the question that you also, as this argument regarding the bombing of proxies, alarming them week ahead so that they have time to leave their compounds. But you are also referring in your text to the political change or hope that was the reason for which Joe Biden was elected almost 4 years ago to the position of President of the United States. And you argue in a way that everything that we do have right now, and in a way, U.S. president is the most important politician in the world, so that's the reason why I say that we do have this situation, is far away from being normal. Why?
You know, the president just, part of it is that he's, how do I say this? Well, is that there's a certain question whether or not he has the same capability and energy to be president that he had when he ran. And to a certain degree, you know, for instance, every time America has responded to a terrorist attack or a military thing, the president goes on television to the country within hours and explains this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. In fact, one of the causes, I think, of our new isolationism is there's no one leading. The president doesn't go on TV. He doesn't explain why we're helping Ukraine, or he did once in one national address, but this has been going on for, you know, over 2 years now, and the president just doesn't go public that much. This is very abnormal. Normally, American presidents kind of see their primary role as a leader in foreign policy. They're a world leader. This is stuff that Congress doesn't do so well, that the president kind of can make a clear position. And so we're seeing this terrible lack of leadership from Joe Biden. to the point where he actually had a special counsel reviewing a criminal charge against him for, hiding documents or retaining top secret documents when he was vice president. And the report came back and said we couldn't convict him because the jury would see him as a nice man with a really bad memory.
Okay,
And,
so if that was the reason for which the U.S. citizens decided to change the leadership back in 2020, we are in also a very strange political situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there were not too many cases of presidents coming back to the official office or potentially coming back to the office. And we are facing this kind of situation right now. And looks like Donald Trump's perspective of being the runner-up or the possible president of the United States also raises lots of questions around the world, not only within U.S., as you do have hot political debates as in every democratic state.
Oh, I think you nailed it. It's very interesting. It's only happened once in our entire history that a president came back after losing. It was Grover Cleveland. That was back in the late 1800s. So it's been a very long time since that's happened. But right now, I mean, Donald Trump, if the election were held today, Donald Trump would win. He leads by 5 points. His opponent in the Republican primary, Nikki Haley, leads by 14 points over Joe Biden. But the problem was the main argument that Trump's Republican opponents had in the primaries was that he was unelectable. But when he's leading in the polls, it's really hard to make that argument. In fact, the Biden administration was hoping to run against Trump for that reason. They thought he was the weakest possible candidate. And he still could. I mean, the former president has a way of sticking his foot in the mouth on a regular basis, and he's still like all these criminal trials that he has to go through. But President Biden is so weak politically that just about anyone with the Republican label can win this election right now.
Does it mean, I don't want to get into too deep into internal U.S. politics, but this is a question that people ask themselves all around the world. Is there a chance, a possibility, a political way for the Democratic Party to change a person who is going to be a presidential candidate, not the president of the United States? He's got a right to fight for his second term based on the U.S. legal regulations.
Yeah, I think it would be, the longer they wait, the more difficult it will be. Because people have to, if it's an election where they're going to run for the Democrat convention, they have to get in the race and get in the primaries, and some of these deadlines are already passing.
Okay.
So short of Joe Biden deciding personally not to run again, making a decision that he's not going to run and just reject the nomination, there's no way to do it. Now, if he does that, then it becomes a free-for-all at the Democrat convention, and you'll have a few thousand delegates who will pick the nominee for everybody else. Probably not Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris, I think, would have a hard time winning that nomination. Unless they go past the convention and Biden resigns, then traditionally they may make her the nominee. But they have a whole bunch of other candidates out there, like Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, Governor Gavin Newsom of California, who are kind of itching and ready to run if Biden signals that he can't run for a second term.
So that's,
but as you
at least
point out,
theoretically,
the longer it goes, the harder it will be to happen.
Okay. So my final question is the question of another front in a way, because the Middle East front, we touched upon China and Taiwan, we touched upon Ukraine, which is our primary field of interest, but there is also an issue of Middle East and of everything that is happening after October 7th, and actually after a bombing of Tower 22 American base in Jordan. What does it add up to the picture that we are drawing here? What is the meaning of this theater in this broader perspective of world geopolitics and American position?
Well, obviously, it's a very big issue from the United States point of view. And this is to the credit of the Trump administration, is they saw the anchor of the Arab side in the Middle East being Saudi Arabia, and that working towards an eventual alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia would bring stability to the region based on their common enemy of Iran. The problem is the Biden administration, like the Obama administration before it, has been sort of they've been trying to make Iran the linchpin of Middle East policy. And, it's hard to think that's, a country that ends its Friday prayers with death to America and has for the last 40 years is suddenly going to become a reliable partner. So I think Israel's stability is very important to the United States. It's almost a 100% issue for Republicans. Democrats are starting to change it. And this has complicated the major issue again. We always thought that after October 7th, the aid to Israel would kind of carry the aid to Ukraine. But a lot of Democrats are now turning against Israel in their actions in Gaza. And so now we risk losing a whole bunch of Democrat votes on a foreign aid bill on Israel, just like we might lose a bunch of Republican votes on the Ukrainian part. And so it makes the calculation that much more difficult.
Yeah, that's another big topic. Hope that we are going to have a chance to discuss it again and to find answers to the questions regarding this strange shift that we haven't seen in U.S. and internal politics for a very, very long time, because there is a kind of political shift, and you just touched upon this subject in your last answer. Professor, thank you very much for your visit. Again, all our viewers should subscribe to Professor Strand's Substack. You can find it by typing politics and sausage making, which refers to the famous political quote. Professor, thank you very much. Hope that we are going to have a chance to talk again soon.
I hope so too. Thank you very much. It's an honor being on your show. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your presence. You can also join us on rachoń.com. Leave us your email as we try to deliver you up-to-date analysis regarding the things that are going on the front lines of this ongoing war against the West. See you soon. Ciao.